So what is music? It sounds like a dumb question. I mean, we all feel like we know what music is, but I think you'd be surprised at how many, honestly, pretty shaky assumptions back that up, and just how much there is to learn if you're willing to chew on this one a bit. Because very plainly, music is strange. Behaviorally, it's bizarre. It's so bizarre that scholars from anthropology to cognitive science, they can't always agree on a basic definition of what music really is. Its purpose, its role, its defining characteristics. Like, it's this odd thing that we do with vibrating bits of air. It doesn't provide food or water or shelter, but it's so fundamental to the human experience globally and throughout time that it's not something we really question too often. I'm David Hughes, this is Charcuterie Sound, and this week we're going to try and answer a deceptively simple question. What is music? Now, it's important to begin with something kind of obvious. What music is, it's not something that's settled. There's not one universal answer. Rather, there are a bunch of different ways of approaching this question. Even to talk precisely about this stuff, you have to define your terms and really try and surrender some of your biases, and both of those things are kind of impossible in any absolute way. But we do understand some things about music, so don't worry, this is not going to be a 20-minute long thought experiment. At least not completely. And that might sound to you just like a bunch of semantics, to which I'd say, yes, of course it is. Really, it's just looking at the meaning of words and parts of speech, and we can't really communicate clearly without semantics. But I'm getting worked up, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's dive into the first method we can use to determine what music is. One way to look at what music is simply by observing, noting what's there and what is not. And this is music theory. Don't let that scare you. This is not a music theory lesson, don't worry. But basically it concerns itself with the structure of music and its most basic parts. And these basic parts are what's commonly referred to as the elements of music. You may have heard of the 6 fundamental aspects. Some say there are as many as 8, but this is kind of your high school band class kind of music theory. Pitch, duration, timbre, texture, harmony, form, something like that. There's also some disagreement about if any of those have to be present in order for a work to be called a piece of music. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. And of course, are any of these elements fundamental to all music? Some component which should be found in every single musical tradition around the world? Some think that a rhythm or a pulse is a likely candidate, perhaps inspired by the steady rhythms of the human body, like our heartbeat or breathing. So unfortunately, you really have to break out some philosophy and even some cognitive science to kind of crack this one. And since asking why can sometimes clarify the what, let's do it. Let's ask the question, why music? So as far as I can tell with my arts and humanities brain, a spandrel in biology is a phenomenon where a trait is inherited that isn't directly adaptive. It doesn't really provide any meaningful advantage. It's just kind of this byproduct, an accident, a vestigial limb. And there are some cognitive science people that really like this idea. Steven Pinker probably being the most well-known proponent. He calls music auditory cheesecake, hitching a ride on the already present faculties of language. When we make music, to him, we're simply tickling ourselves in a pleasant way, essentially. Now, this has come under fire for some of its assumptions. We can't figure out exactly why it's here, so it mustn't be here for much of a reason. I don't claim this to be Pinker's argument, but these are the reasons why scholars aren't really settled on one cognitive definition. Some people say that there's a partner selection advantage. I think a lot of rock stars could probably speak to that. Could be a social cohesion thing, pro-social bonding behavior that requires coordination from your group. Your standing in the group can keep you alive and help you pass on those musically inclined genes. Although I don't want to get too much into the weeds on this one, I am a music writer and more of a culture guy. But if you want a good multidisciplinary and more specifically cog-sci investigation into our relationship with music, I would point you in the direction of Aniruddh D. Patel's Music, Language, and the Brain. But whether music is cheesecake or a community building jam session, we still don't really have a definition for music. Now that's just a cheeky title, but it does reveal something about how we define anything in the arts, really. And if you've watched my channel before, you know that one of the ways of looking at musical genres is through social consensus. Like, Donald Fagen might not like being called yacht rock, but that won't stop people thinking of Steely Dan as yacht rock. Music as a whole is a little different. Some scholars like the idea that if it's intended to be experienced as music, well, then it is. My favorite definition is a fairly simple one, and it's from Andrew Kania, a titan in the world of the philosophy of music. He's tackled some of the biggest questions in music and aesthetics more broadly. Dr. Kania defines music as any sound intentionally produced or organized to be heard, possessing basic musical features such as pitch or rhythm, or intended to be listened to for such features. It doesn't seem that groundbreaking, but it's laying out some pretty important lines in the sand. The most important being organization and a focus on intention on the part of the music creator. One criticism I've seen of this definition, by a random Redditor, mind you, is that you can intend for something to be something and fail. And the reason why I bring this up, it's not a scholarly rebuttal, is that it just seems to be a lot of people online respond this way to it. I'm not sure why, but basically, as I understand it, it's kind of like carrot cake. You can go through the entire process intending to make carrot cake, but in the hysteria of baking, you forget the most important defining aspect, the carrots. You wanted to make carrot cake, you thought you were making carrot cake, but you didn't make carrot cake. But to me, this is not the argument that it seems to be. First of all, music almost never requires carrots. Also, the wording is very intentional for this definition of music. It's not just that there's intentionality, but there's also this kind of like phenomenology to it. You're intending it not just to be music, but to be listened to as music for such features. Maybe there is a way to make a carrotless carrot cake, but we'll get to that later. One of the major problems that Kanye has worked on is the relationship between art and music, i.e., are there forms of music that are not art? And also, can you have art that uses sound, or lack thereof, and have it still considered to be music? You may have heard of John Cage's famous work for piano, 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Which some consider to be just recorded silence. But there are some accidental sounds here and there. Sounds of the audience, the hum of a distant fan. John Cage was deliberately trying to get us to think about these kind of things. But Dr. Kanye rejects this as music. He frames it instead as a form of non-musical sound art. Because there's no intentionality behind these accidental bits of sound, which in John Cage's own words are the whole point of his work. Now, Kanye does believe silent music can exist, but it has to be structured, intended to be listened to for the features of music. He cites an example where a composer only uses rests to create a score. Boom! Organized, rhythmic, and the silence itself is intended to be listened to as music. John Cage, on the other hand, is pointing to the fact that true silence is impossible, and you are to listen to these little accidental sounds. I prefer Simon and Garfunkel. And if you're starting to think, who cares? This is getting very cerebral. I know music when I hear it. Well, I'd say that you're kind of operating off of this definition anyway. But sure, let's move more into the arena of what we mean on a day-to-day basis when we're talking about music in conversation. So our colloquial definition of music varies, especially by culture, but it's often something like structured sound, often for human artistic expression, that may combine human vocalizations and or instruments. It's a solid kind of mutual understanding of music so you can chat about it. And it seems like we're pretty good at figuring out which sounds are intended to be music and which aren't. But I find our colloquial understanding of music fascinating because it still has its borders, and those borders can be a little blurry. And I think you can find out a lot about a person's thinking in regards to music by where these borders are and how blurry they are. For example, if you ask someone off the street if the jackhammer they were just hearing is music, They would probably say no. But what about the rhythmic tapping of an anvil by a blacksmith? Blacksmiths will often tap the anvil after striking the piece of metal they're working on in specific rhythmic ways, sometimes using chants, sounds, or phrases to keep it consistent. Does that count as music? I mentioned before the sea shanty. It's meant to keep sailors working as a unit, amplifying their strength in bursts. Now this has broken its bounds and clearly become a form of music in its own right. But what about at its most reduced heave-ho? Is that music? And this seems to form a foggy limit for most people, I think. And of course, with the advent of large language models, the body of technology that we refer to as AI, these borders can blur even further. Like, is the music created by AI even music at all? Now, colloquially, maybe, depending on who you ask, but is it an actual piece of music, or is it just mimicry, a simulation of music? So, for example, I can feed my dinner guests "I Can't Believe It's Not Butter," and it could fool them, but it doesn't make it butter, does it? I would say that AI also lacks that certain intentionality that we talked about earlier, to which my AI-inclined viewers might say, but what about the prompt writing? Is that not intentionality? Is that not composition? And I'm not so sure this makes them the intentional composer of the piece. Maybe a curator or an inspiration? I don't know. I don't get too far into this because AI and music really deserves its own video, I think. So why does all this matter? Why do we need to know what music is and what it isn't? Why do we need a definition of music? And to me, there are three main reasons. The first is authoritarian control of art. Authoritarian regimes in the past and the present have loved to determine what is art and what is not, specifically things that question the regime. And the same is true with music. There's music and then there's like degenerate music that doesn't really count. But educating yourself on just how much of a complicated question that really is, it makes you less vulnerable to this kind of manipulation. Secondly, I think it helps you develop a deeper understanding of the human relationship with sound. There are so many musical traditions out there that even doing a little bit of armchair comparative studies can really enhance your enjoyment of the music that you already love, and it can help you find new music to enjoy every day. And thirdly, it's just fun to wax philosophical for a bit, and if you made it this far into the video, you probably think so too. This has been an extremely broad and insufficient overview. I'll leave some further reading in the description for my fellow super geeks. And if you enjoy learning about music, or just want to improve your daily listening rotation, please consider liking or subscribing. It really means a lot. I do appreciate it. I try and release a video about once every month, but I'm trying to commit more time to it, and hopefully we'll see a faster schedule going forward. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and as always, keep listening, stay curious, and I'll see you next time.